Fitzmaurice.
First, thanks for coming in. You talk about 173,000, is it in employment, Brendan? What was involved in agriculture 20 years ago, overall?
I can't say, Deputy, but in my own experience, the number of farmers overall hasn't really changed very significantly in my time in the department. So we have 129,000 applicants or so for basic payments, and we still have 129,000 or so applicants for basic payments. And we have new applicants coming in, 3,000 or 4,000 a year, and 3,000 or 4,000 a year exiting the system. But I can't say how many employees were involved in processing or downstream industries 20 years ago. I'm not sure, to be honest. You might have the figure now, but I don't.
Yeah, no. In relation to, and I want to touch on the chairman, what he spoke about there. Our AIM system in cattle is probably the best in the world, in fairness. And we register about 2.5 million calves a year, roughly, or whatever, give or take a bit. And in fairness, it's clinical. You know, no one could ever fault, to be honest about it. And as Jackie said, if you haven't done in the 21 days, you're in trouble. You know, you get the letter. The department are well on top of it. How come for a lack of horses, compared with that we have 7 different crowds, that the owner of a stallion that could get the book, this is what's going on, and the department are allowing this, that the owner of a stallion could get a book. How come that it hasn't been looked at to get one proper operator? And fair enough, you have to do DNA, I understand that, so it's not going to be the 3 or 4 days like the calves are done, but in 1 month I'm talking about. Yeah. The 2023 books, there's still 200 of them knocking around, and more if the truth was known. The 2024, there's sales coming up, and there's people waiting on horses, and there's judging or whatever they have to do. People have their tongues out for them. I have a case actually got this week that's 5 years going on. How come that the department, if that was a farmer with cattle, the department would have them shut down. How come that it's not tightened up, or that the will isn't there to do that, compared with the professional system that's there for cattle?
Yeah. Okay, well, I think you have to, well, first of all, they're different businesses.
Yeah, I know that, yeah.
Right, and I know
just one small question with it, and I brought up the other day. In 2016, you changed the regulations that you didn't need the owner's consent to change a book over. And why is that going to be changed back again now?
Okay, so well, first of all, the first thing is that we're going to look at every dimension of this, and I think I've said that from the outset. Look, we've a really outstanding bovine identification system, in part because we went through difficulties with bovines back in the early 90s. So, you know, after 2001, our system really, really improved, and we have a very, a pretty tight system. These are different sectors. So with bovines, for example, horses live a long time, and they move a lot. And they move to competition, and they move across borders, and they move at the north, and they'll move multiple times in their lifetimes. With a bovine, generally, you have a bovine born, reared till they're 30 months of age, slaughtered, maybe 2 or 3 movements in the meantime. But it's a much different system, more compact. And the other thing is we're slaughtering 1.8 million bovines a year for human food. And the fact is that horses aren't reared here with that intention in mind. So that's just an explanation of the history, Deputy, but it's, I mean, I don't have to explain that to people, but it's just a fact. So, like, we did change things after 2013. We introduced a single database. We introduced security features on the passport. We're on the point of introducing e-passports. And I would say that the legal framework we apply in relation to horses is consistent with EU law. And the legal framework we apply in relation to bovines is consistent with EU law. So what we know now, I think, is that the system can be circumvented for horses. And we'll have to look at every dimension of this. We'll have to look at the time for registration. We'll have to look at how you register. Do we require a DNA sample, for example? Because a lot of horses, we have a DNA sample. Do we check the DNA sample after the point of slaughter? Do we check the DNA sample at the point of export? Do we change the system of issuing passports? How do we do that? And maybe we move to e-passports. So I don't want to prejudice what the outcome of this exercise will be, but it's clear we have to do something fairly dramatic and we have to do it quickly. So, I mean, I accept all of that, Deputy.
Okay. In relation to strategy going forward, or targeted supports for farmers,
yeah.
I know that there's a new EU directive in up to 10 hectares, but farmers would contend to us that it's getting harder to farm with paperwork.
Yeah.
For the and is there any strategy going forward to basically simplify that? Is there any strategy, or is it worrying to ye that at the moment we have a worrying sign in the suckler herd of an exodus? Is it worrying to ye? I think in the last few days we have seen the sheep sector, something like 6% looks to be down. Is that a worrying trend for ye, or what is the strategy on that to support those types of farmers?
Thanks. So, look, I mean, I have a view on this which I'll express, and my view is that we have to provide support to support people's incomes living in rural areas who are engaged in agricultural activity. And that will involve targeted supports for various kinds of livestock, and we do that. I think we've more targeted supports now for beef and sheep than we ever had before. The sheep payment has gone up to €20 a head, which was something that was asked for a long time from the farm bodies. We have other options for them. We have very generous organic payments for a lot of people whose systems are on the edge of organic anyway, and we have supports that way, I think, which will suit people if they think about it. And the number of farmers in organics has tripled. We have environmental schemes, which again suit people along the west coast and suit people with suckler type farms. Lots of people with suckler type farms. So I think the supports are there. We do have a complicated system, there's just no doubt about it, and part of the, I suppose, when you think about the evolution of the CAP, there was one great simplification when we virtually went to a single system, a single farm payment. If you remember, it replaced about 10 schemes, and it was pretty simple. It was controversial enough at the time, but it was simple, and we decoupled, we paid per hectare. And now we have an increasing number of schemes, and we have to think about what simplification means. My blood runs cold when I hear simplification, to be honest with you, at EU level, and because we're not good at it. But on the other hand, we have a trend towards results-based schemes, which means that you have to measure the results of what you're doing. We've a shift towards environmental schemes, and again, you're looking at the outcomes for those. So we've an increasing number of schemes, and I think the next time around, and we'll be expecting new proposals now to be published probably the middle of next year. The next time around, we have to think about what simplification means, and we're kind of reflecting on that in the department at the moment in a very active way. So we're just about getting used to this system now.
Why isn't it, and you're there,
Yeah.
you know it inside out, Brendan, we seem to, at the moment, we have a fiasco in acres, right, for a lot of farmers. That's not being resolved at the moment. It's dragging on and dragging on and dragging on. And I know that a certain amount of money was given, but there's farmers now, because this flowers thing that you do, we're looking at the area, the department might say we didn't get this even though it's been gone in, and they'll be looking for money back even though that hadn't been looked at properly. The acre scheme has been a problem, and okay, you'll say you'll iron it out or whatever, but why isn't there a system to say, well, we're not going to go into all this bang again in 4 more years' time, and we're going to, the computer system we have it set up for it, rather than starting off again and another hullabaloo going on for another year and everyone fighting with each other trying to get it solved. Why haven't we consistency in saying, or even why don't we look to do like a 10-year scheme, as bad as it is, and 8 years into it, start that computer and try and get it justified. On top of that, there's, you know, you talk about trying to make it simpler, be it conditions coming in on ye or whatever, in fairness to the farmer, like peaty soil, for example, there's big debate at the moment what's going to happen. The derogation. Say, I was talking to a farmer this morning, and I didn't actually know it, that he couldn't plough because he was in the derogation. And some of the stuff that's coming out is constantly putting pressure on these people. And I know you're trying to say that you're trying to comply with the EU stuff, but farmers are getting sick of it, to be honest about it. And I just can't understand why someone doesn't make a decision and say, we're going to have this scheme and we're not changing that. If you put in wild bird cover, if you have fence and riparian zones or whatever, it's good. If it was good for the environment for the first 5 years, it should be good for the next 5 years. That's what I'm trying to say. Is there any thinking on that for a strategy?
Yeah, well, you've kind of anticipated my point, Deputy, to be honest with you. So what I was going to say is, just in the context of simplification, we have to consider now whether the best simplification now is just leave it alone. You know, so and that'll make life much easier for us. And that would make life easier for farmers. At least they'll be used to the system by the time we get to the end of this period, and we will have ironed out whatever difficulties we have with acres. But the last time around, I suppose, we got approval for our programme at the end of 2023. We had to get applications in for schemes by May 24, and the entire programme was so completely different. I mean, it was just utterly different. We had to rewrite every system we had, but I suppose I will make a defensive point now. We still got €1.8 billion out to farmers in that year, but there are difficulties with acres.
Well, I'm not criticising the cap part. What I'm on about is the acres side.
So I mean, acres was a scheme with.
In fairness, the rest of it was.
So it was a scheme with high environmental ambition. I know you're going to talk about it. There's another session after this. But I think it's a very good scheme. It is complicated. It came at a time when we had to roll out an entire new set of schemes. I mean, these things aren't done in isolation. There's a resource in the department for dealing with IT issues, and we're trying to manage these things. I'd love to be the first Secretary General in history who's able to say there was no disruption between one cap and another, but I'm not that guy, but I wish I was. But it's just, look, these things are difficult, but I agree. One form of simplification the next time around might be do the least possible change.
Do you think I agree with you that some, especially the environmental schemes, if you're in on something and you have it there, geez, that computer system is all we hear about. In the line of forestry, the forestry 2022 to now, it's problematic for you, to put it mildly. 2016 to even now is problematic for you. We'd have said here many a time, and in fairness, this committee and the chair, we've spent a good while trying to, and there was certain things ironed out, but there's a distaste in the farming communities for it now because of all the problems that went through. Can you see, or when will it be realised that even though you're putting out, I look at the figures, I think there's 1,900 hectares so far or something like that, the uptake isn't in it, you know what I mean? There's no point in saying that it is. When are you going to realise that we're not going to achieve these figures that you're on about, that it's fantasy world, that you need to look at something like, and I've brought this up a few times, that if every farmer under 100 acres and then up 200 acres, shelter belts or whatever, that it would be an option rather than this 1 hectare stuck in one place, or down along the ditches that you could do with, that would tick the box for ye, but wouldn't stop the farmer farming. And when you're mowing a field, you don't go into the corner, like you'd be going around in a semicircle. So that it would be, there'd be a lot of people that take up on that. When are you going to try and look outside the box? Because the box that you're looking at the moment is closed. It's not going to happen. And on the fishing side of it, the last question, these are the last two because I want to let others in. You know, we talk about fishing, as you use the word sustainable, but we have less fishing now going on than we had 10 years ago, 20 years ago. Go back, keep going back. And I wouldn't call commissioning or decommissioning boats, cutting them up, basically going forward as a good idea. So,
Okay. So there's a lot there. First of all, like we had 2 hours in Forestry a couple of weeks ago, and we had a bit of a chat about this stuff as well. So I think we have a range of quite imaginative schemes that should be of interest to farmers, including the 1 hectare and the riparian zones and agroforestry. And even the more intensive forestry is, you know, for some farmers who have a very low stocking density, is compatible with their farm enterprises. But we have a job to do and try and promote it. And Deputy, if there are other ideas, then I don't think we'd be close to those ideas. But we have a job to do now. We have a system in place which has very generous incentives for people. They're extraordinarily generous. And it's in its infancy. And it has this legacy issue. So it's understandable that farmers will be, you know, in the early stages reluctant. So I think what's important is that the people who apply now, we give them a good experience. So when they come in, like we made a special effort when there were applications over the last 3 or 4 months to phone the applicant when they applied and tell them where their application was and let them know when they'd have a licence, all things going correctly. So I think we have to kind of try and mind the people that are in it. And I'm not sure we'll be as convincing for people as potentially other farmers who have a better experience. So, I mean, that's going to take a little bit of time, I think. On fishing, decommissioning. So, I mean, first of all, there was a Brexit negotiation, and part of the result of that was Brexit negotiation was that fishermen lost quota in Ireland in the context of an overall package. That wasn't a deal done by Ireland, by the way. It was a negotiation between the EU and the UK. And then you're faced with people chasing smaller numbers of fish. And we had a seafood task force which involved a consultation with the entire industry, and the decommissioning scheme was one of the features of what emerged from that consensus approach. And that's the way it happened. These things are unpalatable. But if the choice is that you have a larger number of vessels chasing a smaller quota and everybody goes broke, or that you can provide an incentive for some people to go out so that a smaller number of vessels are chasing a quota where they have an opportunity to make a decent living. I think that makes sense. So I'm not expecting you to agree with me, Deputy, but that was the rationale for it. And we didn't come up with it. We engaged with the fishing sector and we agreed a strategy which included decommissioning. So that's the reason for it.
Ryan.